Hi folks, welcome to my Pit Retro Journal. Today I'm actually celebrating my fourth year anniversary on my channel. Last year's anniversary, I did something interesting. I took a road trip to Nashua, New Hampshire to 3 Sinclair Plaza because I wanted to find the headquarters of the Sinclair back in the early 80s when I got into it by buying a ZX81. And it was actually pretty well received, and I actually enjoyed doing the trip and seeing the original building and kind of thinking about how cool it must have been back in the 80s when I was still rather young. So this year what I want to do is do another road trip, but not to a different Sinclair location. Actually, what I want to do is, I think my second job out of school was with a company called BBN Technologies. And they actually are famous for one of the first things they did in the 50s is they created the acoustics for the world, the UN. And then, but one of the other things they were famous for is they created the first hardware for the internet back in the mid 60s. So they created the first connection between Lincoln Labs in Massachusetts, MIT, and I think it was Stanford. And they created the hardware, the first routers and whatnot. And I got to work for this company in the mid-90s, and I was in one of their research groups, not networking, and I got to meet some cool people there, and it was a cool company. And one of the things, they ended up getting bought by GTE, which rebranded itself as Verizon, and then later on, they actually resold it, and then it kind of rose from the ashes. I think now it's an independent company again. And one of the things it is, they wrote a book called Where Wizards Stay Up Late, The Origins of the Internet, and it talks about, and we got this book, I don't know if it was autographed or not, but we each BBN employee got this book because it talks a lot about the BBN folks. It's a cool book. It's by Katie Hafner and Matthew Lyme. Came out in the 90s. And BBN was named after Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. Bolt and Beranek were MIT professors, and Newman was their grad student. And Leo Beranek actually also did acoustics for how they sound concert and opera halls. And this is a signed copy that I got in 1997 from him. And it's pretty cool. And so, I want to do a road trip. So let's do that. Let's go find it. I actually don't live too far from the place. I'm going to be very vague about when I start the route. I'll start on Concord Ave, and we'll just walk down and take a look at the building and also some of the buildings that I worked for. And let's go and take that journey and show you something about a company that's pretty famous and created the internet. All right, I'm heading down Concord Ave towards Moulton Street, where BBN's headquarters is. On a beautiful summer day in late June. To the right of me, it's Fresh Pond, which is a fresh water reservoir. I'm not sure if it feeds Cambridge or other cities. Usually, it doesn't always kind of work out the way you think that a freshwater reservoir in a town feeds the actual town. Usually, it comes from elsewhere. So as I'm walking down, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on BBN. It was founded by Leo Beranek and Richard Bolt, both MIT professors, and then later on Robert Newman joined them. I think he was their graduate student. That's what I heard. I'm looking at the Wikipedia BBN. It doesn't have all the information so I was told when I was at BBN that I think Dick Bolt and Leo Beranek got their start doing it because they were acoustics engineers. I think they helped do the acoustics for the UN, but I'm not sure if BBN was involved with that or not. But the reason I'm doing a video on this is because BBN was famous for creating the first routers for the internet. They had the DARPA contract to do that, and it was the internet messaging processor that they developed and created the first connection with. And as I'm walking to the headquarters, I thought I'd read this because so it says interface messaging processor. In August 1968, BBN was selected by ARPA to build the internet interface messaging processor IMP for the ARPANET. the precursor of modern internet. The IMPs were the very first generation of gateways known today as routers. Under the leadership of Frank Hart and Bob Kahn, 4 IMPs were produced for nearly $1 million from September to December. The first IMP was shipped to University of California in September 1969, and the second to the Stanford Research Institute a month later. The first message between the two IMPs was low, phonetically hello, LO, but the SRI host crashed before the UCLA researcher could complete typing login. So they were responsible. BBN was a key participant in the creation of the internet. It was the first organization to receive an autonomous system number for network identification. ASNs are essential identification elements used in internet backbone routing. Lower numbers generally indicate longer established presence in the internet. AS1 is now operated by Level 3 Communications following the acquisition of BBN Ingenuity, internet service provider. I think it was once called BBN Planet. BBN registered the BBN.com domain on 24 April 1985, making it the second oldest domain name on the internet. I think it was retired in 2019. In addition, BBN research pursuing the development of TCP created the voice funnel, an early predecessor to voice over IP, helped lead the creation of the first email security standards, privacy-enhanced mail, shared development of core internet protocols, suite IPsec standards, and performed extensive work to secure border gateway protocol. And they also created mobile ad hoc networks starting in the 70s with DARPA's experimental PreNet and SIRNet. Later, BBN efforts include network positions in near-term digital radio, high-capacity radio, wideband. In any case, it was the ARPA grant that created sort of the first connection using these interface messaging processors or routers, and so that's how the technology sort of expanded. So I'm heading to Moulton Street, and across the street, I think there used to be a sanitarium though. It's now a rest home for retired folks. But here's the main building on 10 Moulton Street, and I'm about to turn the corner. Here it is, and it says RTX in there because Raytheon is rebranded. So I don't know what the deal is with the X's. Twitter is now X, and now Raytheon is RTX. But this was the BBN's main building, and back in the day, there was lots of lore, and one of them was that BBN. This also talks about how they created the first timeshare system by buying a PDP-11 from DEC, and so they had that computer system on hand, and just kind of walking. I'm going to walk between the buildings next. But so it says, after the PB arrived, BBN hired 2 friends from MIT, John McCarthy and Marvin Minsky, and they basically created the first BBN timeshare system, and so I'm heading under the bridge to get into the main sort of middle area of the campus. So it says here, working with Ed Franklin in implementing one of the first timeshare systems, BBM timeshare system. 1962 BBM would install one such timeshare information system at General Hospital, where doctors and nurses could create access patient information. Various nurse stations connected to the central computer. BBM would soon begin more research about integrating computers in medicine, hiring Bob Taylor, an MIT Lincoln Laboratory computer systems engineer. One of the things it says in Wikipedia too is that when the company was first founded, it sort of was considered the third university behind MIT and Harvard, because it really felt like a university, and I can attest to that. When I was at BBN, it really did feel like an academic campus. So heading into the main area now, I'm sort of, as I walked through here, I was kind of curious, how did they, I think when they had the PDP-11s, where did they store them? Probably somewhere in the basement. And how did they must have vented the heat from it into the building somewhere, because they were trying to be as efficient as possible. And I was looking at that going, that couldn't have been where they stored it, because this looks actually relatively new. And that's why I was also peeking into the garage. But so again, I worked for one of their groups that did machine learning. Again, I'm not going to be too specific about which group I was in, but it was actually a pretty cool group. I learned a lot. And but I never, the 10 Moulton Street building, I didn't spend much time in, and then I think my group was in this building at one point. after I left, and they moved out of the one that I'll share with you soon. But this was sort of my experience, is that the buildings were always kind of this beige color with windows that didn't open, brown windows. And so I worked in a building similar to this, but it was 2 stories. It was kind of a factory look. I think it was an old factory that they purchased and converted into offices. And the second floor was a little bit inlaid, and the only window I had in my office was just a small window at the very top that looked out into the sky. I remember that was kind of a weird. But yeah, one of the philosophies that BBN had was that every person, whatever your level, and again, in intro folks were called staff scientists. So I was a staff scientist. They had principal scientists and then lead scientists, and they mostly had folks from MIT and Harvard. As I said, if you read the BBN article, at one point it talks about how BBN got the reputation as the third university in Cambridge because it had sort of a feel and it was populated. And then there's another building here. Again, never spent any time in that at all, but again, definitely has sort of, that's probably the one that looks the most like the building that I was in. And mine was across behind me, and I'm about to turn around and show you what that is now, because those buildings don't exist anymore. They tore them down either 15 or 20 years ago, and that's right now there. It used to be a building just like that, 2 stories tall, pretty long, and it had a bunch of groups in there, and also had the cafeteria. So you got to actually meet all the BBNers. In fact, Leo Baranek used to come in, eat lunch, and you could sit down and talk to him. I think he was in the 90s, pretty old back when I was there, and now they're sadly apartment buildings, or condos, or combination. I don't know. High-end living spaces. Looks pretty, but when you work there, you kind of miss your work area. But yeah, they tore it down and built that. It's a fresh pond area, so it's right on the outskirts of Cambridge, connected to other cities like Arlington, Somerville, etc. But yeah, so that's Fawcett Street, and that was kind of the front area where the entrance to the Fawcett Street building, and it stretched all the way to the back, and there was parking in the back, and I was sort of somewhere there on the 2nd floor. But yeah, it was pretty cool. And was there for about 6 years and learned a lot. Just brilliant individuals, and made me go back to school and get a higher degree. So yeah, I'm going to head back. So that's the main building, and then the other part of the campus. And I'm going to head around back to Moulton Street, and just kind of take a tour. But yeah, so one of the running gags, I guess, was that the halls of BBN, there would be a guy walking around that would be called the @guy, because he created the email protocol, which is one of the protocols that BBN worked on back when they created the internet. And that was pretty interesting. So that gives you the entire building. Wish I would have explored it more when I was there, but when you work someplace, you don't necessarily appreciate it as much as when you're gone. Although, like I said, I've had lots of success since I left, but it's one of the companies that impacted me, I think, in terms of how I approach life and work. I would, back in the day, in the group I was in, there were times where we would spend 80 hours a week, basically, because we're DARPA government contracts that I would have a deadline, and that would mean 50, 60 hours during the weekday, maybe 10 to 12 hours. We'd get there at 9 and probably wouldn't leave until, or we'd get there at 9 or 10 and probably wouldn't leave until 10 or 11. And then weekends, we'd be there for, a shorter time, but yeah, we definitely spend, maybe average 60 hours, but there were crunch times where we had to monitor computers so they wouldn't crash, since we had to run experiments. I think there were a few weeks that I logged 80 hours, but it was fun because we'd all hang out, we'd go to the movies, during the day, we'd maybe go around Fresh Pond, roller skating, play soccer. So it was definitely more of a academic feel, and that's, I think, the genius of BBN is that they gave their employees freedom, and you really ended up. So that fence there is sort of the end boundary of BBN, and so this is the back of one of their warehouse, or who knows what's in these more storage areas or whatnot. That's not part of BBN right there. So yeah, sorry that I'm shaking the camera as much as I am. I'm basically going to walk around the front again. I didn't see anybody, unfortunately, that I could talk to. I think I did this on Thursday afternoon, and it was already 6 p.m. So people were already out of work. And yep, heading to Moulton Street. So this is just some infrastructure. And again, I have no memory of whether this stuff existed back when I was there about 20 years ago. But yeah. But yeah, going back to the culture of BBN, you really felt like you were at one of the companies that made a difference because of its history. Back then, I remember we had a new CEO when I started in '96, and came from other industry, and they basically wanted to tear down all the offices and just give us open space. That was the big thing. And I loved the way BBN handled it. They just kind of went with inundating with facts about how there's lots of research that suggests that's not the best work environment. So we got to keep our offices, which is kind of cool. I mean, for a young, software engineer to get their own office instead of a cubicle back in the late 90s, early 2000s was actually pretty unique. And so I was pretty spoiled in that sense. And the company I worked before I came to BBN was actually right across the other side of Foster Street is Wheeler Street. And they were a couple of BBNers that created their own SBIR, DARPA-funded company. And also we had our own offices. So I was pretty lucky coming out of college that I got my own office every time. But yeah, this definitely has the feel of we had windows that wouldn't open, and again, it was, so this actually has windows inlet. The building I was in was kind of the inverse of it. There was a second floor that had very little windows, but it was inset, and the bottom was just kind of down. But yep, so we're almost back to 10 Moulton Street. And my plan is that I'm going to walk down Concord Ave to Foster Street. There's actually was an interesting company that was right next to BBN, and I got to know the folks because a lot of us would during lunch would go play soccer on Fresh Pond, and we'd play with the folks in that company as well. So you get to know them, and the company, I forget its name, but they basically created a C compiler. Here it is, BBN Technologies, private property. I don't know why I'm so close here. Not good camera work, I apologize. But yeah, so, but they worked on creating an interpretive C compiler. And I really like programming languages as well, although I really appreciate the fact that I learned a lot about machine learning, and that's kind of what I ended up doing my research. And what I kind of do now in my research field, still do a lot of the stuff that I learned at BBN. That definitely helped me become more successful. But back then, I really liked compilers, and I was kind of envious of these folks working on that sort of system. But lucky that I was part of BBN as a staff scientist in my, I think it was 96 to 2001. I actually have I think I was there at least 5 years because they gave me a pair of binoculars for a 5-year anniversary gift. At school too, they kind of did that for you. They gave you, they recognized your time there. You got sort of every 5 years you got a recognition, etc. And again, the only reason I left is I went back to school and decided I wanted to. I worked at some startups after that. I also worked at Microsoft. And actually, what's interesting is the stuff I learned at BBN, I actually applied to Microsoft, and they were like, wow, what you're doing is genius, because I learned a lot about experimentation. Here I'm still looking for how they invented the computer keyed into the building back in the 60s, but obviously that's long gone. But yeah, so folks at Microsoft were kind of impressed that I had sort of these systems in place, because I was in the research group there, and they were just kind of using Excel spreadsheets to kind of keep their data, and I'm like, oh, you should create an experiment database, which is what we had at BBN. So I introduced them to that, and they thought, oh, this is really brilliant. And again, this was not my brilliance, it was BBN's, because they really knew how to do research, experimental research, and it's not something that's intuitive, because you have to be very systematic about it, especially, you think about experimental research being in biology or chemistry, but in computing as well. So here's a better sign for BBN Raytheon parking. Again, I apologize, they can't work. But anyway, that's the building that hosted the company. They did the C development for an interpretive C. And again, I'll put in the comment if I can find what it was. But it was Foster Street that I would take I would come from Fresh Pond. I'd take a right from it. It didn't have a light at that point. It was just sometimes getting out of there during rush hour would be havoc. But again, I never left at 5. I'd always leave at 7 or 8 because, it just kind of felt like there was never a rush to get out to go somewhere else because, like I said, it felt like an academic institution, and so you were with your colleagues and had a lot of fun working, and you got some free time during breaks, a couple-hour lunch to go rollerblading on the bike trail, and then you'd come back and work till 7, so 9 and 7 or 8, so no one complained. You spent all the time that you had to do there. All right, so I'm coming to the end of my video. So this is on Foster Street. I'm looking back on Concord Ave, and so let me go back. So I hope you enjoyed this trip to my old company that is rather famous. Saw some of the old buildings and gave you a little bit of backstory of my experience there. And 4th anniversary. Like I said, I've been lucky being here in the Cambridge area to have been exposed to a lot of cool technologies and people, and yet still I'm fond of the old stuff, especially the QL and the Sinclair products. So that's my 4-year anniversary video. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's look forward to a good year with some cool videos that I've got coming up. And so thanks for your continued support, and I'll see you soon.